Hi friends, good morning. Myself Mr. V.R. Sanav, lecturer in Mechanical Department of KKR Polytechnic Nasik. Friends, today we are going to discuss about milling machine and milling processes. Especially we will learn about the milling cutter. So milling cutter is a rotary tool, steel cutting tool with a peripheral teeth used in a milling machine to remove the material from the workpiece through the relative motion of workpiece and cutter. So in next slide, there are different types of milling cutter. Here we are going to see the classification of milling cutters. So first, that is the plain milling cutter. So under the category of plain milling cutter, there are again three cutters, that is light duty plain milling cutter, heavy duty plain milling cutter, and helical plain milling cutter. Then second, side milling cutter. Under the side milling cutter, again plain side milling cutter, half side milling cutter, stagger teeth side milling cutter, and interlocking teeth side milling cutter. Then in end milling cutter, under the category of end milling cutter, solid end milling cutter and shell end milling cutter is there. Then metals slitting milling cutter, again under this category, plain metal slitting cutter and staggered teeth metal slitting. The next, angle milling cutter. There are two types of angle milling cutter, single angle milling cutter and double angle milling cutter. Then form milling cutter, under such category, convex form milling cutter is there, then concave form milling cutter, then corner rounding form milling cutter, and form milling cutter. The next, that is slot milling cutter. So there are again two types of slot milling cutter, T slot milling cutter and dowel slot milling cutter. And next, that is the thread milling cutter, and last, that is the fly milling cutter. So this is the plain milling cutter. So in plain milling cutter, the cutters are cylindrical in shape and having a teeth on its periphery. The teeth are generally parallel to the axis of the cutter. Such cutters are mounted on a machine arbor between the spacing collars. These are used to produce flat surfaces parallel to axis of rotation. So plain milling cutter, as shown in figure, depending upon the size and application, plain milling cutters are categorized as light duty, heavy duty, and helical plain milling cutter. So a plain milling cutter with a larger width is called as a slab milling to remove more material and form harder surface as a coarser teeth slab mill is used, whereas to remove less material a fine teeth slab mill is used. Then next, that is side milling cutter. Again, in side milling cutters, it is used to remove the metals from the side of workpiece. Peripheral teeth do the actual cutting of metal, while side teeth do the finishing work. The teeth may be parallel to the axis of the cutter or helical. These cutters have teeth on the periphery and on its side. So these are the further categorized as plain side milling cutters having a straight circumferential teeth, staggered teeth side milling cutters having alternate teeth with the opposite helix angle providing more cheap space. So half side milling cutters have a straight or helical teeth on its circumference and on its one side only. So interlocking side milling cutters has a teeth of two half side milling cutter which are made to interlock to form a one unit. The next, this is the diagram of end milling cutter. So end mills are used for cutting slots, pockets, small holes, keyways, and light milling operation. These cutters have teeth on their end as well as and periphery as shown in figure. They are so named because they have a teeth at one end only and the other end acts as a shank similar to a drill. The cutting teeth may be straight or helical. Such cutters are mostly used on a vertical milling machine. Depending upon the shape of their shank, these are categorized such as taper shank mill, straight shank, and shell end mills. Then next, that is metal slitting saw. So these cutters are like a plain or side milling cutters having a very small width up to 5 mm as shown in figure. These are used for parting of milling deep slots or narrow slots. It has a more teeth per unit of diameter as compared to ordinary plain milling cutter. The teeth of this cutter may be straight as in a plain milling cutter or staggered like staggered teeth side milling cutter. The next, angle milling cutter. These cutters are used to cut angles in the workpiece. and these cutters have a conical surfaces with cutting edges over them. These are used to machine angles other than 90°. Two types of angle milling cutters are available: single angle milling cutter and double angle milling cutter. So single angle milling cutters have one conical surface and are used for milling dovetail surfaces. The cutter angle is generally 45° or 60°. But in case of double angle milling cutters, it have a teeth on two conical surfaces and are used for machining V grooves. The included cutter angle is generally 45° or 60° or sometimes it may be 90°. So next diagram. So this is the diagram of the form cutters. The form cutter may have different types of profile on their cutting edges, which can generate different types of profile on the workpiece. So depending upon the tooth profile and their capabilities, some of the form cutters are explained. That is, convex milling cutter is there, concave is there, then corner rounding and gear tooth is there. So in case of convex milling, these cutters have a profile outward at their circumference, and they are used to generate concave semicircular surfaces on the workpiece. So next, that is the concave milling cutters. These milling cutters have teeth profile curve in a words on their circumference, and these are used to generate convex semicircular surfaces. And next, that is the gear cutter. These cutters are used in making gears on milling machine. So gear cutting is an operation which cannot be done otherwise. These cutters have tooth profile which are to be produced on the gear blank. So next, that is T-slot milling cutter. So in T-slot milling cutter, these are the special form of milling cutters used to produce T-shaped slots in the workpiece. These have cutting edges on their periphery and both sides. They have integral shank which can be held in the machine spindle. A typical T-slot milling cutter, as shown in figure, they are used to cut a T-shaped slot on the component as in tables of milling machine. These T slots are used to hold the device like universal dividing head, then attachment, then workpiece, etc. on the milling table. So first, a plain slot is cut with the help of a plain milling cutter or an with the help of end milling cutter. Then a T slot is cut with the T slot milling cutter. Next, these are the some materials of milling cutter. Then high speed steel is used for the general purpose in milling machine. Then cemented carbide is used for long production runs and heavy cuts. Then next material, that is cast alloy for high speed, and then inserted tooth type cutters are more common nowadays as they reduce the cutter cost. Thank you very much.